Hello.
Hello.
Right, different one.
We're indoors.
We're indoors and we've just finished an episode, confusingly.
We're doing the intro at the end.
Yeah.
This is like proper professional podcasting.
Professional as shit, mate.
I am.
What's the earliest I've ever sworn? What's that? 15 seconds in and I've sworn. Enjoy!
Yeah, you also swore in a very comedy place in this podcast, so look out for that, kids.
Yeah. So
it was an enjoyable moment.
Are you thinking about the same one I am?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
But wait, this is episode 50 of the Forest School podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I'm sorry to disappoint you, listeners, because we were going to do a whole podcast about earthworms.
Yeah,
But instead,
we're very excited about
as like episode 50, but instead, we've only got, I'm afraid, Tristan, Gooley, the Natural Navigator, which is going to be a massive disappointment to those of you who are really looking forward to hearing about earthworms. I am, of course, joking. It's incredible. We've got Tristan Gooley on the podcast.
You've been sat down for a really
for
long
an
time.
hour and a half. Oh my god. Yeah, we waffled, he waffled. It was
We just could have talked for ages.
It was incredible.
If you don't know his books, please go and get his books. Listen to this podcast and then go and get the books, because as I said in the podcast, they're so information dense that if you think, oh, I've heard most of what this guy's got to say then about that, because he just drops it in through conversation, and so you know, feel free to keep rewinding it back and go, whoa, he just said a thing about this. Like, do it.
The bit about the house, about nature being a house and looking through the windows, my mind is still blown by that. So
I know, we've got to go
look
and sit
out for
and
that
think.
bit. Look out for Lewis's comedy swear. And
yeah, see, that's a sign that I'm not in control, that we had a professional author on that we both quite highly respect, and it was early in that as well. I feel like it was like a couple of minutes in. I just was like, I'm setting the tone now, just so you know, I'm going to swear.
Oh my god. No, I think it was about 20 minutes in.
It wasn't? Okay.
So it wasn't straight away. He might have hung up if it had been straight
away.
Yeah, so I hope that you enjoy
That's enough of
the
a ramble.
delicious waffles.
Enjoy.
Bye.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.
No worries.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. It's brilliant to speak to you, because we came to see you in Taunton in the bookshop when you were talking about your latest book, Wild Signs and Star Paths.
Oh, thanks.
And we just really, really enjoyed it. There was a couple of Forest School people there as well. We bumped into a fellow Forest Schooler while we were there. And I know you've spoken at the Forest School Association conference as well.
Yes, that was fun.
So I'm sure that your work will be known by a lot of people who listen to this podcast, but perhaps not. Perhaps some people are listening to this and don't know your work. So you've obviously written quite a lot of books about natural navigation and nature connection. How would you describe yourself? Would you describe yourself as an outdoorsman who happens to write books, or as an author, or?
I started. It was all. I started doing what I do just to keep myself entertained. It started in a very sort of crude way with putting journeys together, and the journeys became a bit more ambitious. And then I found that I came to natural navigation because the irony was that with conventional navigation using instruments, the bigger the journeys, the bigger the kit, the less interesting it is. And so that tipped me back from sort of 1,000-mile expeditions back towards sort of literally 2 miles across the English countryside, and sometimes a lot less than that, just using nature's clues. And so that I pursued that entirely for my own interest and curiosity and fun. And then I noticed that people were more curious when I was talking about it than I expected them to be. I think we've all had that experience where you have a pet passion and you accept that the world is not necessarily going to share it, but sometimes you can't help talking about it, and I think again we've all had that experience where you see people glaze over, and that's that time when people lean in and go, tell me more, and I found that people were. I can remember one time in particular lying on a beach in Turkey on holiday with friends, and they were good enough friends that they'll tell me to shut up without any encouragement, and I was just talking them through all the different constellations and how they can be used to find north and do other things, and I was waiting for them to go, oh mate, will you just give it a break? And they didn't. And 1 hour later, we were still chatting about it. And that I suddenly realised that maybe I'm not the only person in the world who finds this stuff interesting. And then in 2008, was it 2008? Anyway, I started teaching it more formally, and it was odd. I was expecting to push that old sort of analogy of kind of pushing a boulder up the hill, and I was expecting it to be a very big boulder and a very steep hill, and I gave it a big shove, and it just started rolling. People just, were interested, and I was amazed because I really didn't expect anybody to have any interest in it at all. So that led to the school, and by school I mean really me on my Todd going around teaching anybody who was happy to be taught, and then that led to the books. But the books are now a very big part of what I do, because I love the books because they allow me to simultaneously teach and learn. So I can take things that I know and share them through writing, but through that process I will then explore and discover new things as well. So I really love that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually, in this latest book, it seems like you've done a load of reading about neuropsychology and brain science generally in preparation for this book. Is that right? Yes,
I read a book by the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, who's often described as an economist, but I think that's just because money is so powerful that if what you do could be described as helping economics, you can earn more through it or whatever. I don't know, but the long and the short of it was that his book was the fruit of a lot of pioneering academic research that he did with an academic partner, and the amazing concept within it just happened to chime with some of my experience in the outdoors. Yeah. And that chiming was really that I was starting to sense things outdoors, and then not always understanding why other people weren't sensing it, but also struggling sometimes because it felt too automatic and intuitive to understand why I was sensing it and they weren't. And so I was having to unpack it, and what it turns out is that the thinking fast is intuitive thinking, when our senses and our brain work together to tell us something without us having to quite literally put two and two together. So I mean, that's not a bad example. If you put 4 objects on a table in front of anyone, a child or adult, and say how many, they won't have to count. But if you put 24 on the table, they will. One is very fast thinking, and the other is slow. And that applies to the outdoors experience, in the sense that if you point out a bird alarm call to somebody who's perhaps never, they will have heard it thousands of times, but they might never have focused their attention on it, they will then hopefully go, I recognise that sound. But that's quite slow thinking. But with a bit of practice, there comes a point where all outdoors people sense something in the environment because of the alarm of the birds nearby. And it was that shift that the book was about.
Well, we have that quite often. It's noticeable to us, being, we're 2 leaders who are outside, in one woodland, so the same woodland 5 days a week, but we have lots of different groups visit, and I quite often feel like I'm being a bit rude, because parents who have come, who it might be their 2nd or 3rd visit, look at me very weird when mid-sentence I have to stop and look at something because a bird has made a noise, or a branch has creaked in a way, and that stuff that is almost like it's a sound they didn't hear, but it's like you're saying, it's that, that fast and slow thing of your brain's always scanning, isn't it? It's like you've got I can't remember now if it was in the book or when we came to see you speak, and you were saying about listening for your name being said at a dinner party.
The cocktail party effect, I think.
Yes.
I think they call that, and it's that's a lovely example, because everybody's had that. As you say, your brain is busy, and the fact that I cite, I can't remember where I came across it, but that our brain is dealing with 11 million bits of information per second. So to stop it going into meltdown, it has to have been more than 10 million of them pretty quickly.
Yeah, in the book you say that our brains are busy noticing things we think we miss, which I think is a really nice way of saying, and you're sort of reassuring readers of the book that we are actually doing a lot of this stuff already. It's just that you're not conscious of it, and we can move the awareness into our I don't know, the other system,
It's
so that you
that
can
unconscious consciousness and the conscious, that analogy.
Yeah.
Consciously incompetent and all those things.
Exactly. Yes, and there are lots of metaphors that people are familiar with, and some of them are so familiar they become cliches, like learning to ride a bike. And I think that's an interesting one, because my kids are now 16 and 13, and they've been riding bikes for years. But when I was sort of helping them to learn in the very early stages, I had to remember things that I'd completely forgotten, but which I've been doing. Like, if you're not 100% steady on a bike yet, the difference between a tiny bit of uphill and a tiny bit of downhill is huge.
As you can see.
And that is something that, if we jumped on a bike we didn't know or something like that, we'd try and get to the feel. We'd probably sort of aim downhill, but you wouldn't even necessarily know that you were doing it. You'd so there are so many examples like that. And in the outdoors, there's a sort of, for me, beautiful irony about this book, which is that by using modern examples and a lot of contemporary academic research, we're actually going backwards to what the brain was originally. I'm getting close to using non-Darwinian language here, but I find actually, in terms of understanding these things, evolution is sometimes quite hard for us to visualize. So our brain wasn't designed, but sometimes it feels like that. But our brain has evolved to tell us that there's danger out there, because we can sense it in the change of the sound of the wind, or the birds, or the animal, other animal noises.
Well, it's a bit trial and error, isn't it? And the brains that were errored got eaten.
Yeah.
It's that thing.
Yeah.
I was reading. I was listening to some people talking about boys, young boys particularly, fascination with things like dinosaurs, but also with like big machinery, diggers, rubbish trucks, things like that. And they were suggesting that is the part of our brain that when children, like young boys of that age, needed to look out for megafauna. They needed to look out for tigers, rhinos, lions. But if you don't have that, what is the closest thing? It's the bin lorry. It's this enormous thing that comes around.
That's interesting.
And dinosaurs are that same thing of like, your brain is sort of programmed at that age to go, you should pay attention to the movements of this machine because it's big and it's in your world, and that it's kind of our brains have misappropriated and just gone, that's it, go for that.
Yes, I do find that I think there is still a lot of mystery in that area, because I think the I don't know whether we call them behavioural scientists or evolutionary experts or whoever they are who are specialising in this area, I think it's quite easy to explain, things at that sort of level. But how we end up with the right number of different software engineers, for example, and things like that. Of course, the market plays a part. If you put a higher salary on something, you're going to attract more people. But I still don't fully grasp how we went from needing maybe half a dozen to a dozen basic skills to make society work, 20,000 years ago, to 20,000 different trades. And something I hear at schools quite regularly now is that the kids who are at school now, 70% of the jobs that they will do have not been invented yet.
Yeah.
And quite how our brain has gone from, just being able to spot the difference between a fungi that will do us good and kill us, and sharpening perhaps a hunting weapon and one or two social skills, and a bit of cooking and that sort of thing, to all these different things. I still don't understand. There is quite a cute mystery in there somewhere, I think.
Oh, but I think I'm completely fascinated by this. I think there's a massive crossover between all of this kind of brain science stuff and forest school and the outdoors generally, and that whole neuroplasticity thing about being able to, the more you give your attention to something, the more it will actually physically change your brain, and that being quite a big kind of argument for the benefits of forest school and the outdoors for young people and adults, in terms of kind of going back, as you kind of put it, that's how we were designed to function in the outdoors and all this kind of stuff, but also about learning what you might call the soft skills of being able to learn and being able to observe and adapt and all those kind of things, which make you a successful human when you're grown up, rather than now we're all going to practice, this particular
rote
skill.
learning of the alphabet.
And so if you've got the freedom to be able to, play and explore and adapt, both adapt to your landscape, but also change your landscape and have mastery over it through play outdoors, and spotting patterns and all this kind of stuff that you write about and teach about. That's how you begin to become an adult that can suddenly learn, okay, yeah, this job is redundant now, it doesn't exist, I'm now going to adapt and change to this. So I think a lot of forest school people are into forest school for that reason, not just about the kind of nature connection, but the freedom for children to use nature as a playground and a brain building space.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I had to I remember the moment distinctly when one of the things that I've learned as a parent, and all parents learn sooner or later, is that you have to find a lot of synonyms for the word walk. If you threaten kids with a walk, and you're off to a hard sell already. But I'm preaching to converted there, obviously. But so we were going on a mission or whatever it was, and in my mind it was to the top of a fairly modest hill in our local woods, and I knew I had to be back for something. I can't remember what it was, but I'd already sort of given that kind of time limit. Well, it'll only take us about 3/4 of an hour to get to the top of the hill, 3/4 of an hour to, do this, and then half an hour to get home, and all that sort of stuff. And one of my boys, came off the path and got very excited by one of those quite dramatic sort of storm-felled trees with the sort of root ball and everything, and it was a sort of halfway between a sort of ready-made camp and a rather sort of monstrous-looking sculpture in the ground, and I instantly was like, oh, we haven't really got time, and I had to pull myself up, and I remember it so well that it's what honestly is the point of taking the kids outdoors and then sort of marching them past something that's really grabbing their attention. So I soon after that, we do still occasionally try and get from A to B, but by and large, I'm happy to forsake B if what's between A and B is more interesting to them.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we've talked before about this is one of the things that keeps us going in forest school is quite often the children will take that example of the tree that's fallen down, and the kids want to go and explore that rather than the thing you were walking to. But when you get there, you realise that you, the adult, go, I'd never noticed that before, or that's a completely different thing for me, and kind of being open to. I don't want to say being open to learning, because that sounds like a wanky poster, but being open to going, I'm interested in all of this. And
children are, and that kind of goes back to the point you were saying earlier about being worried that you're going to bore your friends about the constellations. That I definitely get that feeling that I'll bore someone to tears about woodlice or whatever, or be just really excited about, oh my gosh, look at this. And kids are there with you in general because they're also super excited by something they found in the mud, whereas your average adult has kind of gone, oh right, okay, or they're not really seeing it,
or they've shut it, or they've named it and therefore sort of closed the book on it. I always find that you get the adults that go, woodlice, I know about woodlice, and they shut the book intellectually and go, there is no more to know about woodlice, I have named them and I know where they live.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, in a hopefully a gentle, kind and considerate way, I've been on that warpath with almost all my writing, in the sense that so as a writer I have a constant so what, as in I try to never state anything factual as the end of a piece of writing. So if to give you this sort of thing as a sort of arc, when it actually sort of works quite well, we can use, there are more than 20 different ways we can find direction using shapes and colours within trees. So instead of sort of saying, this tree's branches are shaped like this, and this tree's, whether it's to kids or adults, if you say, all the branches are growing towards the light, but the light is different on each side of the tree. So what? Well, we can now use that to find the place we're going to. Okay, but why? And this type of thinking is quite, for certain people, and it's a lot more than I would have feared 15 years ago. This type of thinking is sort of it's self nurturing, and to the point where, I mean, I had a lovely moment the other day where I'd gone for a bit of a roam in the local woods, and I didn't have a destination. I was trying to get myself half lost, which in my local woods is still just about possible, and I was having a lot of fun. And then I spotted these sort of I don't know the formal name for them, but the fungi that puff and sort of push spores up into the air when a raindrop lands on them. And I was loving this, and I took a couple of photos. And then when I got home, one of my boys had come home, and I showed him a short bit of video of it whilst we were having tea. And he'd joined the dots that I'd failed to join, but using the logic that I'd been kind of sharing with him over a few years. And so I showed him the thing, and he goes, "Oh, so you only find those in wet places?"
Oh, wow.
He hadn't even been on the walk with me, which, he'd got back from school whilst I was on it. Otherwise, I'd have probably somehow got him out there. But he was using that. So instead of, I'd fallen into my own trap in a sense. I was sort of going like, this is quite nice. I was just touching the top of the fungus with a small stick, and the spores were sort of flying out. And to me, there was a visual spectacle there, but I'd fallen into my own trap of not following it through with the so what. What is that telling us? What is the clue or the sign in my sort of writing language? And it was my son who'd, poor chap's been so brainwashed. He goes, "So you only find those in wet places?" I just loved it. It was yeah. I digress.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. That is it, isn't it? Is joining the dots, and that's such a good way of thinking of it. Is the so what? And because one of the things that I was wondering when I was reading your books is we talk quite a lot in the books and in general, sort of outdoor leaders talk about, these skills are running, they're dying out, or these skills that used to be, or in some parts of the world are still vital, but are let's say becoming rarer and rarer. And I was wondering, when you write the books, when because the books are chocked full of information, and I was just saying to Gemma before, not that they're a fast-paced read, but they're very information dense, which is amazing. And I kind of wondered, when you're writing it, do you have things that you go, everybody must know that, and you throw it out, and some stuff that you sort of give to the editors or the publishers or whatever it is, and they go, well, nobody knows about that thing, how do you pitch your level of what goes in a book and what's,
It's a really, really interesting question, because I wrestle with that in a fun way daily, and I've like all writers, I got it right and got it wrong at times. But in the early days, there was, it's quite fun for me now, but I can remember publishers with a lot of experience before my first book, The Natural Navigator, sort of looking at the proposal going, they're a bit more polite than this, but they're saying, nobody in their right mind is going to have any interest in this sort of nonsense. And then, so when I actually wrote that book, the publisher who'd been brave enough to take the plunge and probably thought that they were, on a hiding to nothing, but thought, you've got to take the odd risk in life. Let's just publish this mad stuff and see what happens. And as I was writing it, I put forward things like Xanthoria, the wonderful golden lichen that likes light and is more common on the south side of roofs and trees and stuff like that. And she came back to me and said, no, think of Auntie Brenda at her kitchen table on a Sunday. She doesn't want to see the word Xanthoria. I was like, okay, fair enough, better than me and that sort of. And then what sort of happened, I don't know if it's a reflection of how reading has changed or society has changed or tastes have changed. I honestly have no idea. But what happened was I got a new publisher, which was part of it, but I got pushed in the other direction, which is people want expertise. They want people who know a subject, live a subject, breathe a subject, and can, even if they can't follow you in every sort of way you go, don't patronise anybody. That no writer would want to do that. But at the same time, don't be scared of taking them on quite an intense ride. And so if you have read more than one of my books, you may see this happening occasionally. So The Walker's Guide to Outdoor Clues and Signs, the stuff in that which in certain places is, okay, let's do this. Let's really do this. There are star techniques in that when I wrote it, I'd be very confident saying that fewer than 1 in a million people would have any idea about. So but then on the flip side, I want as many people as possible to read my books. In the early days, it was about making a living. If X copies weren't sold, I wasn't 100% convinced I'd be able to carry on doing this. I'm now fortunate enough that I can look at it in a more sort of altruistic way, in the sense that I feel a bit evangelical and ambassadorial towards natural navigation. I want to be helping the subject to not die out, and that to do that I have to get the balance right, because if I excite 1 in 10 people but freak out 9 in then 9 out of 10, I'm not doing the subject justice. So it's a really fun balancing act, and I'll keep on getting it right and wrong.
Yeah, well, I think in this book definitely there are signs which
Don't tell him he got it wrong.
No, I'm not going to tell him he got it wrong. I'm going to say it's got it right in a kind of it's aspirational, so, and in that way that your publisher said, you want to be able to read something where you go, whoa, this is expert knowledge, and it's aspirational, because there are some signs which I've read in this book and been able to kind of pick up quite quickly, but I must say kind of 1 at a time or 2 at a time, and then kind of go back and reread those chapters and check what I'm doing before I can then get a new one under my belt and into my kind of common usage in my own life. But there are some of them are easier, like the ramp effect. I've used that quite a lot, and Orion, finding south from Orion.
So I found Orion really interesting.
Go on.
Because when we came to see you talk, you had lots of visuals of Orion, and I remember thinking, it was tracking east and west and looking at the belt and the sword and which way it pointed. And I remember thinking at the time, I don't completely get this. I get east to west, but I don't get much more of the angle.
Yeah.
But then a few weeks later, when I got to that bit in the book, I sort of understood it at like level 2.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I feel like you could reread some of the books, and you might just go the first time, okay, I'm just getting that's how you find north, or trees are funny shapes. Got it, Tristan. Let's move on. And then the next time you read it, you get like, oh, they're funny shapes because of that.
Yeah, and you have to see it in the real world. That's the thing. So it was only Orion, the penny only dropped for me when I noticed it walking to my friend's house the other night, and I suddenly was like, oh, hang on, I remember something about that. What was it? What was it? And it was very bright, so the sword was very bright. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am walking due south. And that was such a powerful, joyful feeling. It's completely addictive, isn't it? I can completely see how once you start owning it and go, oh, I know this thing, and especially because it's something that isn't common knowledge anymore, and it's something that you have, and it's a new thing. But there are bits in your book, as I say, that are kind of like, whoa, that's next level. Like the chapter, I can't remember exactly what you call it, but when you're in a woodland and you're talking about how even paths made by animals, so muzzets and stuff, reflect more light than ground that hasn't been trodden a lot, so you can kind of see light in woodland, and so I was telling you about this, wasn't I? In our woods,
in the woods,
and I was trying to, because we have got an old track, and you were talking about on certain types of day, in certain types of weather, you'll be able to sense where the path is just by looking through the trees because of the light levels. And I was sort of like, whoa, that's definitely something. That's the next level for me.
Jedi skills.
That's really interesting to hear, because you're right. That is not something that we are necessarily going to see every time we go outdoors. But a lot of this stuff, the fast, slow thinking, musical instruments are quite a good analogy, where the logic's actually very simple. Okay, when badgers or deer are following a certain path, that is going to change the ground in a number of different ways, and that is going to change the way light reflects. Okay, that's quite, I don't think anybody's going to be freaked out by that, but actually seeing it, so to me that's very like, I sometimes sort of say in talks, I may have done on the one you came to, I can tell anybody in the world how to become a world-class concert pianist. You play the right notes in the right way, in the right order. That's similar to this sort of thing. The logic is very simple, but it's entirely up to us how much we, in truth, how many minutes or hours we choose to devote to it. It just so happens by coincidence that this morning I was doing a lot of that particular signs. As you all know from the book, clues and signs are things that can give us information in either a fast or a slow way. But in the book I talk about keys. These are the things that give us a very fast sense without having to do any slow thinking. And by the end of, we were walking, I think it was about maybe 3 hours, and we'd started looking at with my friend John, we'd started looking at various things and animal signs and trails. And by the end of the walk, because that's what we'd chosen to focus on, these trails were almost luminous. As in, what had taken a little bit of concentration, even for two people who are doing a lot more of this than most people would choose to. It had taken maybe a sort of 20 seconds of kind of yeah, there it is. By the end, it was laughable. It's like we wouldn't even point. We'd almost not point them out to each other, and we were sensing deer and seeing deer that were probably around us at the beginning of the walk, but by the end we'd got into that kind of zone where we could almost sort of just go, there is going to be one through there, and then we'd see it, and that's as I say, it's not complex. The theory is not complex, but I can't make I can't. You can't play the piano brilliantly without a bit of practice, or in my case, you can't play it at all well even after a lot of practice. But that's a different story. So in terms of these outdoor skills, I can sort of show people what the key is, and then people can choose. Out of the 50 odd in that book, Wild Signs, I would expect people on average to find 5 or 6 that they just feel an affinity towards, and either because in the case of your listeners, they think, yes, that is something I can share, or that's going to form part of something we're going to do outdoors tomorrow, or just because it's sometimes hard to articulate, but it's a very personal thing that just chimes. And I don't expect all 52 to do that.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about the practicing. So even someone like yourself who has kind of gained these skills and written about it, but then in the course of a morning, you practicing a particular thing to look out for becomes, is just there. This week, I don't know if you've ever seen these cards called Go Find It. It's like a game. Have you seen?
No, I haven't. They're
really simple but really fun, and they come in a little drawstring bag, and they have a word on them like crunchy or dead or slimy or whatever, and you can play it with kids, so it's a good thing to encourage kids to go on a walk. So it's not like we're going on a walk, we're going to play this game, and as you're in this natural environment, you can like find things that fit the card basically, and you can play it in loads of different ways and do it like in a really high octane, we've got 30 seconds to find as many things as we can that are bumpy or whatever, and we were playing this game with some families this week. And having played it for maybe about 10 minutes, I then took some families, really little children and their parents, on a bit of a woods walk just looking for natural treasure. And I found, because I'd played the game for 10 minutes, it was like I had new eyes. It was incredible. I was suddenly seeing things on the floor that I would never have noticed. I would have walked straight past. But because I'd spent 10 minutes practicing, I then was like, oh my gosh, there's an acorn on the ground. Hang on a minute. It's sprouted, it's growing in the ground, I can't pick it up, oh my gosh. And I on that walk, because I'd got my eye in, I then noticed all this stuff, and I was wondering whether you think that if you don't practice it, you can kind of lose these skills a bit, even after practicing it for years maybe. Do you feel like you have to keep your eye in and your hand in, otherwise you begin to lose it a bit?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I occasionally, like I think we all do in different areas of our life, we worry about sort of skills atrophying and things like that, and it becomes almost a sort of an anxiety of, oh my God, that's going to be gone forever. I'm never ever going to be able to do that again. But the good news in this area is that because the theory is so simple and it is hardwired into us, our ability to do it, that all that really changes is our sort of currency. So perhaps sport is a better analogy in that particular sense, in the sense that, if somebody enjoys sort of playing tennis but doesn't play for 6 months of the year, they don't expect to go out there and it all to work straight away. It's similar in this area, and I find there are wonderful sort of seasonal tie-ins. So by sort of early November, I know, as you'd expect, most of the constellations I use regularly, I'm not going to forget. There are one or two sort of, very minor ones. I go, I haven't seen that old friend for a while. Exactly the same thing with wildflowers in spring and birds throughout the year. And there's no danger that we're going to lose the memory of what is possible, all that happens is that our currency fluctuates, and that's absolutely fine. I think that's all part of the fun.
Yeah.
So you talked before that you do like in-person courses on natural navigation with different groups. I think you've mentioned a couple of different ones. One, did you say you did some work with the military?
Yes, yeah, I do do a few different jobs for the military. I've sort of helped them with giving them another perspective on image analysis. So on the side of military intelligence, they've got experts who I've spent a little bit of time with who are looking at stuff which it just looks like visual gobbledygook. It just makes no sense at all. But they are skilled in that, and they are seeing, military units and formations and things like that because they're practiced at doing that. And at the same time, I was able to kind of say, here, let me show you a picture, and then I'd ask them a question which would seem like gobbledygook to them. I mean, the one in particular was there's an image I use sometimes in indoor talks and things where I say, have a look at this image, and it's a picture of a house, and there are some lights on and various other things, and you can sort of see some orangey light in one corner, which may or may not be the sun and that sort of thing. But that's all you can really see, and they and most people were probably expecting me to say, what direction are we looking? And there are approximately a dozen, maybe more, clues to direction in the picture. But what I actually say is, this is a photo of a house somewhere in the home counties. I can't tell you exactly where. Tell me what the oceans were doing in the Pacific when this picture was taken. And that's why I was there for that. It was just it was hopefully a fun lateral thinking exercise, because we all have that when we get in the groove of doing things. And it's a little bit like you were saying, and we were chatting about when kids literally take you off the path, there can be a resistance to it because we know the path, we know where the path is going, that sort of thing. But, metaphorically, they are showing us different ways of looking at things. And that's sometimes what I'm doing with different groups, whether it's the military or other. And then on the pure navigation side, I do work with them as well, sort of helping. A couple of weeks ago, I helped them design a course in terms of how soldiers who've been involved in an ambush can get fast across a town without using any equipment at all. So that's now part of their training. But the lovely thing about my work that I'm very, very grateful for is that I get to work with people on such a wide spectrum. It's Women's Institute one day, it's Special Forces the next, it's artists the day after that, it's botanists, geologists, zoologists, astrophysicists. It's I'm really spoiled in the breadth of the subject and the breadth of the people who've been kind enough to take an interest.
Do you find when you're doing the course? So again, I read 2 or 3 of your books, and then came to see you talk, and then we've read this other book, and as you say, I can definitely sense that zealous is a strong word, but more and more passion it comes through. And when I saw you talk in person, you're clearly very, very passionate about the subject. Do you ever find, and it's similar actually to when we're running sessions with children, and so like I've been reading some books about earthworms recently, and then the kids went digging for worms, and I could feel myself just vomiting information about worms at these children, just going, oh my god, my brain is so full and it's all so interesting, and just have it all, and do you find that when you get with presumably you have to sort of tailor a Women's Institute group very differently to the military groups, but how do you not just go, let me tell you everything about every star, and it just run off the rails? That must be so difficult to control yourself and sort of pitch well as a teacher, I guess.
Oh, it's interesting and interesting question. Sort of very, very sort of kind thing to say. But it's toughest when giving a talk to a large audience, because I'm a great believer, and I think all good actors, and I'm certainly not one of those, but I think all good actors treat each audience as a sort of individual organism, as in it's not a couple of hundred people in a sort of giant mass. It's something, and that is interesting. But I've always, partly because when I started doing this, I was pretty nervous on stage, as lots of people are, and so I wanted to do the best, and I wanted, and part of that was was inevitably being super sensitive to the group I'm with. I mean, if you're with 3 people for half a day, there are lots and lots of ways you can tune into what their likes and dislikes are. I wrote a book called How to Connect with Nature, actually, which I think it's in that I mention that if I've got a group of 20 people, there will always be 3 couples, and therefore 3 people who've effectively been dragged along. The numbers there. And this is something you must have come across in your work lots. But it's and that for me is that's the real test. So sometimes what I'm doing is I'm eavesdropping, just because what I want to know. So in that book, one of the premises of that, and one of the things I feel very, very passionate about, is that there is a route into nature for everybody. But if you try and hard sell the wrong route to somebody, you don't get anywhere. So in very, very sort of broad terms, we have, going back to our sort of ancient origins, we have certain practical affinities. We have an unusual interest in food, cooking, catering, and that obviously lends itself to something like foraging. Or we might be quite sort of restless, travel-loving types. That might be natural navigation. But there are so many subtleties within this. Like if you're somebody who's very, very interested in something to do with the home, and there are a whole lot of different things going on there. You can have interior design, or you can be really interested in steel girders. But within that there is a structural building part to your character. And then you can start taking a real interest in, the way certain woods will rot and not hold things up, and other woods will give cherry woods a nice rich colour, pines are a much lighter colour, these sorts of things. So if you have a group, sort of coming back to your sort of question, if you have a group, their interests are going to be narrow enough that if you do just bang on about everything, you're gonna miss them with 90% of it. So it's very hard with a group of 200, but with a smaller group, it's for me, and I don't always succeed, but I always try and go, okay, these people by and large are absolutely fascinated by the shape of the land. There's a lot we can talk about there. They seem to go a bit cold if we start talking about astronomy. So we can just pretty much bin that, and that's the challenge after a few years, I think, is still finding that, seeking that connection, fascinating.
I love that. Sorry, I love that idea of going back to ancient interests, like evolution-wise, about food and shelter building. I think that's probably very true, and again ties into forest school very, very neatly in terms of appealing to people's kind of ancient interests. I think that's I've never heard that before. That's very.
I sometimes think of it. It's a little bit like each group is a lock, and you've got a drawer full of spare keys, and I'm just putting different keys in and going, is it this one? Is it this one?
Yeah.
Is it this one? And when you find the key that goes click, and you're like, yes, right.
Yeah.
Now the lock's gone. We've
definitely found that with food and cooking, that is a key that very commonly fits. So we just noticed, without any kind of prior design really, it happened, and we realised, wow, that's a very interesting effect, that we cook a lot over the campfire with groups, and one time we were cooking some kind of pancake. There may have been some like wild garlic in it, or something
was being fried.
Something was being cooked over fire, and there were 3 frying pans on, and I think Lewis and I started off the process, but then just passed the spatulas to some parents that were around, and just invited them to take over and take ownership of it, and then noticed how that kind of unlocked the group, and people who never spoke to each other suddenly were speaking to each other, and it was that idea of they took ownership over the provision of food for themselves and their children and everybody else, and were saying, oh, this is ready, come and eat it, or whatever, and talking to each other, and now we do plan to kind of put that in quite early
so we usually have our forest school in always in blocks, so that a family will join and they'll commit to coming for a certain amount of time rather than just coming once and going away again. So whenever a new group is coming together or quite a few new people are joining, we tend to plan that in quite early on.
Social glue in.
Yeah, and it's just all about the food, and it doesn't have the same effect if we cook it and then hand it round. It's all about, and we take a step back and they're by the fire by themselves, all
sounds
cooking.
very manipulative when you say it like that.
It does,
like we're puppeting.
But it's a little key. It's a thing that just.
Yeah. And I think that reminds me of worst experiences for me at school, and I know I'm not alone in this, which is when things are too regimented, and you are going to be told to do things and expected to do things, particularly in front of other people, that are a bad fit for your aptitude or confidence or whatever it is. So to give you actual practical examples, if you go into a gymnasium and you line 20 kids up and say, right, we're all going to try and climb to the top of these high ropes as fast as we can, or something like that, there are going to be certain kids within that group who are going to go, this is not fun. This, I really am not going to enjoy this. My mate's going to laugh at the fact I can only get halfway up it and that sort of thing. And, and yet, if you go into a gymnasium, this is what you guys are all about, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert in what you do, but my understanding is it's more a case of we're going to go into a gymnasium and see what happens. We can kind of tell you what steer you towards certain things, but we're not going to tell you have to go up the road. Instead, you can have a go on the springboard or the this or the that, and it doesn't all have to be physical. It can be somebody can the gym needs redecorating, the this, the that, and that, and there'll be something that kind of fits our aptitude, and that's I think probably inspired by forest schools and other sort of movements. I think schools are, I get the impression, getting better at that, certainly than they were in years gone by. But
I don't know.
Maybe
not.
not.
No, you're not. No, I maybe I'm too optimistic. But
Do you know what? I do think there's a bit of a bias where like people who are outdoorsy naturally end up sort of more drawn to schools that are more like that, and then have a perception of like, oh, all schools are doing forest school twice a week and have a thing, and then if you looked at the broad spectrum, there's going to be a load of inner city schools somewhere doing not that kind of stuff.
Well, also you're talking to two ex-teachers here, and we left for similar reasons, in that we found that the curriculum was becoming very narrow and prescriptive and didn't give children much time for kind of freedom. And the thing you're describing, the example of the gym, it was very much like, no, we do it this way, and this is the way you have to do it, and which I think is an old-fashioned way. It was almost like the Victorian kind of style of education was coming back in.
I wonder if I can ask you, because it kind of ties into what we were saying about things being directed, and so lots of kind of I think there is a move in education outside of schools to be less didactic and less, you must look at this, you must sit here, you must do these things, but do you think there's how do you find the balance between we're not going to say to children, eat all the mushrooms, you'll find out, I don't want to tell you, I don't want to step on your toes, kids, but is there a risk that in being too far the other way, that we miss out, that there's that phrase, isn't there, standing on the shoulders of giants, and particularly with things that are in your books have been amassed through tens of thousands of years of human navigation, and that if we don't sort of pass them on verbally or through books and things, that they'll just be missed, and that we're sort of going, oh no, we all have to find these things out from scratch on our own, and that's not a very efficient way of learning.
I think that is an interesting area, and I can't claim to have the answer to the broader sort of anthropological sort of knot within that. But the thing that motivates me is, and this is poacher turned gamekeeper in a sense, that because when I was young, I wasn't one of those kids crawling through the undergrowth with a magnifying glass looking for creepy crawlers. I really wasn't. Up to a certain age, nature was green stuff that got in my way. I wanted to get to the top of a mountain, and I couldn't go the way I wanted because there was stuff growing that I had no idea what it was and had no interest what it was. It was just in my way. So I was not from day one a naturalist, and therefore it comes back slightly to that so what thing. But I think there is a danger that these things go sort of super fallow, for want of a better way of putting it. But the best counter to that I try and strive towards is play to our brain's strengths and sense of enjoyment, rather than so I don't succeed always, again, but I try to avoid the words ought, should, things like that, because I think the second in nature writing you're using words like that, you've lost the argument. Because if you say to a group, if you picked 100 people off the street, let's say in London, and your task is to get them interested in nature, if you start doing ridiculous things like saying you should spend time outdoors, you should, stuff like that, you've lost. If however you say, look for the fly agaric, it's red, it's got those white sort of dots on it, you would have seen it in all sorts of stories, it's the most popular fairy story, sort of toadstool. When you see that, you will find birch trees nearby, and birch trees show you that you're at the edge of the woodland. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the middle of the woods, and you are going to find your way out just using these brightly coloured fungi. There's no or, there's no should, stuff like that, but there's a puzzle to solve.
Yeah, it's play. It sounds like play. You're setting up a game.
Yeah, and that I do, and that is the. I think it's well known that you. I think it's fair. It's almost a law within psychology that you can't change human behaviour by telling people to change. Effectively, I'm not articulating that terribly well, but that's why I believe we see when the government is spending a lot of money and putting a lot of effort into change our behaviour, it's related to things like nudge theory, but actually it's deeper and much older than that, which is storytelling. So if you put on a pack of cigarettes, 17% of people who smoke die significantly earlier than if they had never smoked, or something like that. It, as I understand it, it does not have any more impact than the two words sort of smoking kills, because that's the story. But equally, both of those will have a lot more effect than the words do not smoke. And everything within nature, I think, is related to those sorts of concepts where we don't need to be telling a story the whole time. But we can give people puzzles to solve, and mysteries and riddles and clues and that, I think, is at that point the brain sort of goes, oh right, yeah. So this is actually, this is for me. This is what I do. My ancestors. Yeah. Sorry.
It is like play for grown-ups, I think, and we spend quite a lot of our time kind of reading and talking about play for children. But maybe that's just a personal reaction to it. It feels like play.
Well, I was going to say, I wondered if one of the, you said, Tristan, when you started writing that the publishers weren't sure, who was going to read it, and I wonder, particularly with things like navigation, it kind of ties in as well to bushcraft and things like that, botany and stuff, where these skills have been honed in our brains for 10,000 years, but up until the last 1,000 years, they were life or death skills. It's a very different scenario, saying you have to know which way the sea is, because that is really important to whether we eat or not this week, compared to not to trivialize it, but your brain works better without stress. So not having that stress of like, oh God, we're not as foraging for Mars bars. We will get home. You can, maybe not in Devon, but you can call an Uber in most places in the country. We're free of that stress when we're learning these skills, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, the time frames you mentioned there are interesting, because I think we actually need to rewind quite a bit, because the first agricultural revolution, to the best of my understanding, was about 10,000 years ago. So that's actually, if we're going to see this as a negative trend, a rot or a decay, the rot set in 10,000 years ago when we stopped moving. Right. And then we can look at things like the Industrial Revolution, things like that changed life. I mean, the thing that I find extraordinary and a bit too depressing to really try and get my head around is the fact that both of those revolutions have made us less well off in every sense, pretty much. So if if cash is the only measure of wealth, then arguably not in certain parts of the world. But free time is a fantastic measure of wealth, because if your society is really flourishing, you can afford to spend a few hours doing leisurely things. And if you use the free time measure, the amount of free time that pretty much all societies have had has been decreasing for 10,000 years. Which is, there are little sort of spikes in the other direction. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if that addresses your point exactly, but I find it a bit alarming.
Have you read *Sapiens* by Yuval
Yes,
Harari?
yeah, and I think he picks up that same point there.
Yeah.
I think that's where I first came across that, or it was certainly something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to stop reading it. It got too depressing, and he, I'm just like in a dark place. But he talks about cows as well. He says that cows as animals have like an incredible. Their population has been very successful, but if you look at their overall happiness and freedom, it's just zero basically. And it was just like, oh God, and sort of equating and wheat owning us, wheat,
Yes.
since the agricultural revolution. Yeah.
I'm going to move on from something very depressing because Gemma's looking sad.
I'm about to cry.
Just do you find when you I think are sort of working on your navigation skills, do you give people any advice on kind of whether it's better to have a base and learn one site very well versus going to, like you're saying, getting semi-lost in lots of places, and because we quite often talk about we will I don't know if are you aware of sit spots as an activity?
No.
So sit spots is one of these. It's trendy now through mindfulness, but essentially it's sitting in one place in a woodland or a natural space and just being there and taking it all in. And quite often the activity is you repeat it, so you try and go back to the same space and just sit on your own, so not as a group, you just individually go and find it. And one of the ways that we sort of half manipulate children into it is that we will play stealth games, like tagging games or hide and seek, and while the children are going off and hiding, they're being incredibly attentive to noise and their surroundings and the space that they're in. They don't know that you haven't started looking for them yet, and that
you've deliberately left it a long time because their kind of circle of awareness and concentration.
Because you've got a cup of coffee and you just want to chill.
Yeah, you sort of chill by the fire for a bit and leave them to it. But when you're hiding, and you notice that if you start playing it as well, and you're playing a big game of hide and seek, you become prey, and your awareness goes. But you're kind of prey, but you're playing. Yeah. So at the beginning, you might sit there and be listening, and your observation and sort of circle of concentration is quite wide because you're waiting for it to be found. And then when you kind of relax a bit and realise they're not anywhere near you and you can't hear them, your circle of concentration becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until, you might look up for the first time in ages and just go, oh yeah, okay, I haven't looked into the trees for a while. And then you might look really closely down at the ground and go, oh, there's a beetle there, and your observation skills kind of become warmed up. Anyway,
yeah. So but it's that thing of what I was going to ask is that repeatedly going to the same spot and getting a real depth of knowledge for an environment or a space obviously takes time and takes lots of visits, but then it's also valuable to go and see lots of different spaces and to go, right, well, can you apply your skills in this woodland and on this moorland, on this heathland, and how do you find the balance between that kind of depth and breadth, I guess, is the...
It's a interesting area, and it's an area I've been very fortunate in because it was never part of my original thinking. I mean, I didn't really have anything approaching a sort of plan because I didn't think any of this would work. So it was really a case of wake up in the morning and run with it until you hit the brick wall, which is probably going to be around the corner. But what I have discovered is that natural navigation is very fortunate in the sense it is largely about universal principles. So there are individual species, and I've mentioned a few of them, which give you insight within a certain landscape. But that principle applies all over the world. So once you know the principle, you can try it anywhere, and it's been hugely fortunate to me in the sense that I'm not a great fan of super localized academic knowledge. I have huge respect for people who've spent 20 years studying the same square kilometre, and their work has helped me enormously. But I really am fascinated and like to share. It's a rather grandiose way of putting it, but the universal sort of truths. Things like the way the sun, moon, and stars move in the sky is not random. It's not accidental. It's a reflection of the way the Earth spins. And once we understand that very simple relationship, we can find our way anywhere on Earth by looking at the day or the night sky. Exactly the same thing on the land, except there it's the sun and the wind are leaving footprints. Once we understand what those footprints look like, you can be anywhere from Australia, Timbuktu, Siberia, or Hyde Park, and the same principles apply. One you mentioned earlier, the ramp, the way wind shapes things, whether it's a rock in the desert or some long grasses in the field next to you, it's a universal sort of principle, and therefore where you are, in a sense, which is something that really delights me, is you're just getting a different view in on, to come up with a slightly weird analogy, which I don't think I've ever used before, but imagine a sort of giant house that contains, the truth of nature. Where you are is actually just a window. You can choose all sorts of different windows to look in. You're still, once you understand the core principles, you're still going to find the same thing. And I just see natural navigation as a way into looking into that kind of house of truth. And within that, it's not natural navigation truths. It's what nature is. And at that point, we tiptoe towards more philosophy than naturalism. But so I would, so if somebody's very, very new to natural navigation, I don't go anywhere near those sorts of ideas, because I do want them to just have a bit of fun before they feel they need to do any sort of head scratching. So I just it's just sort of clues and signs that will work in their part of the world. So sun, moon, stars, plants, animals, even buildings, if it's somebody who spends most of their time in a town. But then it's a case of showing people how the bits join together. And then it starts to get a bit more exciting, because then we get into more what would be more recognised as ecology / habitat, but turned on its head. So what I mean by that is, quite often we read about ecology and habitat along the lines of, I want to see butterfly X. Where does butterfly X live? Oh, it lives in this sort of habitat. Let's go to that sort of habitat and we'll find that butterfly. Well, natural navigation is using all that same knowledge and logic, but turning on its head. I've seen that butterfly. That means I'm in a place with stinging nettles and plants A, B, and C, and probably these other animals. And it means I'm at this height and I'm on the south side of the slope. And it means so it goes from very, very simple clues and signs to map making. So to me, it's have a bit of fun with a few things that work for you. Once you feel you're pushing out the other side of that, join a few of them together, which quickly leads into kind of map making. And at that point, getting to know a local area actually is helpful, because if you're constantly trying to recognise things and you're put in a different place every couple of weeks, it is a bit more challenging. But as I say, in a rather long roundabout way, it's the underlying principles, the kind of truths underneath it all that are exciting to me. Not the, there's no. I get asked a few times, what's your favourite place in the world? And it sounds like a very sort of wet answer, but it doesn't really work like that for me, because I'm looking for the things that are not location specific.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Is it? I mean,
that's not an answer, but yeah.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah, it did make me think. One of the things we wrote down that we wanted to ask you, and it kind of ties into that, is I was wondering if there's anything that you used to be able to rely on as a constant or as a sign that because of the climate changing or because of light pollution, that you go, oh, well, I used to be able to recommend, maybe not that the sign has completely disappeared, but that you might go, I used to recommend this as a beginner sign, but now it's become so much more difficult to notice that I wouldn't recommend it anymore. Or do you know what I mean? Have any of those truths changed, or is anything harder to read than it was however long ago?
Well, I mean, my limited understanding of the climate change science is such that it would be very odd if we had witnessed large change, because we're talking at this moment in time, the sorts of changes, as I say, to date, are not such that we're looking at large environmental change at this moment in time. So I genuinely don't know whether it's related to climate change or not, but there were 4 very, very sort of snowy winters in a row about a decade ago, I think it was, and not so many more recently. But it's not for me to say whether that's related to climate change. So I love there are dozens of snow clues, and when where I live in the South Downs, we're 500 feet up, and we do get snow most winters, but I just can't call that as a climate thing because I don't have the authority to do it. But on a there's definitely signs of mildness. So, for example, there's an algae called Trentipolia, which is it's a sort of reddy, rusty, browny colour that does not like surfaces that dry and does not thrive in any direct sunlight. So you'll see it in strips on the north side of trees. There's, like all of these things, there's a tiny bit more to the art of using it, but it does thrive in mild conditions. And my personal experience and what I hear from others is that it's marching north. So it's you can find it over most of England, I believe now. More common in the south than the north, but you won't find many references to it in anything more than 20 years old, because I don't think it really existed here. But again, it's above my pay grade to say whether that's related to climate change.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Do you was it a difficult thing for you when you first started writing to put things down in a sort of permanent way? I mean, partly because lots of what you're writing about is very visual, so having to do it in words sometimes takes a little bit more. I know on your website and in your emails you send out quite a lot of which way am I looking quizzes and things like that, and they're very enjoyable. For anybody that's not subscribed, you should go and sign up to Tristan's email, because they're a really nice break when you go and you hear they're like, but and you're like, oh Jesus, it's an email, and it's Tristan going, which way am I looking? And like, yes, best distraction ever. And do you think that's something that having put things down on paper and in concrete ways changes it from what has been maybe an oral art or an oral education, for quite a long time?
Yes, I do think that's intriguing, and it is. You're right. It's a challenge as a writer. Do you write? It sounds like a question a writer would ask.
We've dabbled, but we do a podcast because we like to ramble rather than commit to anything. Podcasts give us the freedom to go, well, sort of maybe a thing that's a bit like this that you can't write.
Yes, yeah, it is. There's a kind of flow that I think all writers have to find, where you don't sweat the small stuff at the wrong time. So if I'm not certain of a species name or a date or something like that, you can't sort of sit there going, oh my god, I can't do the next sentence. So there's a knack everybody kind of learns, kind of not leaving that hanging, but at the same time, but that's all very technical and dull. But I think in terms of the more, I think perhaps the more interesting side, whether knowledge has been passed on orally is now becoming sort of codified. I did actually in the last book, Wild Signs and Star Paths, I did try and address this in terms of the there's a chapter I talk about the sort of luminaries of kind of those who've gone before us, the hunter gatherers and and in that area I think it's a debate that really we can enjoy rumbling on, but I think it comes a little bit back to the fast and slow thinking, in the sense that in an ideal world I'd want to kind of sort of show things to people, but perhaps not even in a didactic way. Instead of pointing at something and sort of saying this wildflower will only tolerate damp, shady conditions, therefore we tend to find it on the north side of banks. Right, let's move on to the next thing. I think we have probably evolved to learn those things in a less structured way even than that, which is that we pick these things up by massive almost background repetition rather than foreground in your face type sort of things. But I think the lovely thing about setting things down is that it feels like territory that's hard to lose in a broader, social learning sense. So, we do. Humanity is notorious for 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and occasionally the other way around. But once we've learned something and we put it down in writing, whoever it is, and that is the whole basis of academia, isn't it? Somebody spots that a metal reacts in a certain way to a temperature. Right, I'm going to write an academic paper on that. Nobody need go and do that experiment again. They can take it as read. It's been peer reviewed, etc., etc. And I think in nature writing, there are different strands to nature writing. What's generally called nature writing, I think is all good stuff, but I sometimes sort of see as nice cup of tea and biscuit type writing, which is it's you read it and you have a nice experience, but you don't actually come away that much wiser about the outdoors world. And then there are other types of nature writing, which I put myself in the camp of, which is where you're going to try and entertain, but you're trying to inform as well. And if one of them has to suffer slightly, it may be the entertaining side. I'm constantly trying to get those two things, because the most important thing to me is that the knowledge is there, even if, as you've both sort of said in very sort of nice ways, but some of the stuff is a struggle. Sometimes you do have to sort of reread it, and if you're having to reread a chapter, I've probably rewritten the chapter about 27 times and probably struggled with the concepts within it for about 20 years. So but then that's a fair trade, isn't it? That's kind of what I guess
that's kind of going back to what we were saying before about reacting to audiences, and one of the advantages that we have being face to face with our groups and our students is that we can see facial expressions and we can see that puzzled look or the eyes glaze over and go, I've got to shift tack here, I've got to attack this in a different way or put a different key in. When you're writing a book, it must be such a challenge to write something down and go, well, I think people will get that. You've got no immediate feedback from your reader.
Yeah, the editor has to, take on a huge task there, because sometimes, I have a wonderful editor and editors, and there's something I wrote a book called How to Read Water once, and in the back of that I'm thanking all the people involved, and as part of those acknowledgements I think I started it by saying that I was once told that from the moment a writer thinks they've finished a book to that book appearing on a shelf anywhere, there are 38 stages, and the author will be involved in most of them. Now, that's the sort of fact that you have to have selective amnesia, because if you're halfway through a book and you remember that, you're just not. It's like somebody's telling you that the mountain that was 10,000 feet is suddenly 18,000 feet. You just, when you're 5,000 feet up, you don't want to hear that sort of nonsense.
Just a cloud moves across and you see the actual peak.
Yeah, classic sort of full summit thing. So, but part of that process is that sort of, that's why editors are very, very skilled people, because they are sitting on the reader's side of it and imagining themselves into an awful lot of different headspaces and everything else. But then it's a really fun dialectical tussle between the author and editor, and I'll give you one example. Both my agent and my editor, both hugely experienced in lots of different genres, including mine, told me about a book called The Walker's Guide to Outdoor Clues and Signs, that there were 2 chapters that just had to go. They went, love the book, everything about it. Oh, wonderful stuff. But these 2 chapters have to go. And they were 2 chapters about me walking with a Dayak in Borneo. And I could take their point that they didn't sit within, and they're thinking as well as just sort of aesthetic editorial concerns, they are thinking commercially as well, I imagine. It's like,
yeah.
How relevant is Borneo to Mark Brenda or whoever we're putting in that seat? And I dug my heels in, not least because there was literally a lot of blood, sweat, and tears involved in getting the knowledge that was in those chapters. But so there's part of that. But there's part of me. I just sort of went, no, my gut here is that they belong there, and that is the constant artistic sort of arm wrestle. It's between the consensus opinion, which is right most of the time by default, but whenever you're trying to do something a bit risky artistically, you almost have to have that body disagree with you a little bit, otherwise you're not being original. And that's the constant tussle. In that case, I prevailed, and I very, very nearly didn't. And the feedback I get is generally those are again, they might not be the most informative. I honestly don't know, but they are. I get the feedback I get is they are two of the most entertaining chapters. So it's a fun tussle.
Yeah. I just wanted to go back to something you were talking about. Rather than going, we see this plant and it always grows here, and so that's what the knowledge you can take from this. And instead, sort of just observing and noticing patterns rather than telling people this kind of knowledge. And it just reminded me of have you read Wilding by Isabella Tree?
Yes.
Yeah, and the bit where she talks about the nightingales and their habitat after they've begun the rewilding process on their land, and she's talking about a lot of nature writing actually being quite old and not necessarily always correct. So we have learnt, that nightingales always nest in this type of habitat because we've read about it in these books that were probably written in Victorian times and maybe occasionally refreshed, but not very often particularly. And actually, they are observing the nightingales and noticing that they are nesting in different habitats to that has always been written in all this wildlife writing, and that through constant observation and survey, and obviously allowing the landscape to become the landscape that is liked by nightingales, then we notice a new trend or a difference that we didn't realise was there. And it just struck me as you were saying that that I wondered whether one of the benefits of kind of helping people to notice these signs and to have this nature connection might be that new knowledge is gained, as because you're kind of describing a process of noticing patterns and applying, and like that story you said about your son, and making inferences, I guess, rather than just learning stuff and practicing it and whatever, that you might actually be kind of educating a new generation of people who are spotting very important new signs and new knowledge about nature. And I wondered if that's kind of one of your, do you think of that as a goal when you're...
Yes, it's not a conscious goal, but it probably is in there amongst the motivating factors. Yes, I mean, I think that it's a wonderful book, Wilding. Yeah. I learned lots through it, and anybody who's passionate about a particular project, angle, discipline, or whatever, I always feel a sort of kinship with, because it takes a certain sort of strange mindset. I don't want to tar Isabella. I haven't met her, but I hope to one day. But I don't want to tar her with that brush. But this kind of fanatical pushing in one direction or for one thing or whatever is I think you do feel that kinship. But coming back to your actual question, I agree, and I think in amongst that, something that I have noticed is that there is a delightful reverence for old knowledge, which doesn't always tally with reality. So something I've noticed is that you only have to sprinkle in a reference to learning something from indigenous people, and people are just champing at the bit because it represents, this sense of loss and, wow, so you found... There used to be a lot more sort of stories about discovering sort of gold in far-flung places. Well, the gold of today is this sort of knowledge, I think, for people who are curious that way. Mm-hmm. But very sadly, most sort of indigenous communities have, except the very, very, very remote cut-off ones, deep in parts of South America and possibly one or two in Papua New Guinea and places like that. But by and large, we are one generation too late for that sort of knowledge. They're already, I've spent time with people who still use blowpipes and things like that. But even they are not where their ancestors were. But on the flip side, and this is part of what I was talking about, the luminary side as well, because of things like our ability to codify knowledge through, whether it's academic papers or books, things like that, we can push in new areas that our ancestors just either, both probably wouldn't have been able to and wouldn't have wanted to. So we have the luxury, because we're not hopefully going to starve in the next few months, of taking an interest in things that have no practical value. So, and that's what I say to people is that natural navigation sort of fell between two stools. It was neither, a practical necessity for centuries, and neither was it actually a necessity when things have gone horribly wrong. It sits between the two quite often. I mean, survivalists like it, but I rail against that. I'm saying to people, this is something to do because it gives you insight, entertainment, knowledge, all sorts of different parts of the jigsaw of outdoor understanding and hopefully wisdom. but necessity is a very, very, very small part of that. But that then opens up a whole new area. So I can sort of take an interest in things that are giving me a sense of direction, or an ability to make a map, which would never have been of practical value to humanity, I'm fairly sure. So there are, and that to me is very exciting. And I'm sure I get emails and tweets and things like that from lots of people who are using this sort of approach now and seeing things. And I say it in talks and courses. I say, as a group, you will always go on to see and experience more of the world than I possibly can. So please share that. And then that it's really delightful for me. I get about once a week, I get an email from a very strange place, and it comes back to this kind of universal things underpinning everything. Once people know certain guiding principles, and these are the keys and the signs, but a much broader one, which is nothing is random. So if you see something anomalous or something that's asymmetrical or anything or a pattern, you just ask the question why, and quite often we don't get straight to the answer, but there is nearly always an answer, and that answer is part of the broadest, richest map there is. It might, on our walk earlier this morning, we noticed the ground changed colour slightly. We went to investigate. It turned out there were a lot of wood pigeon droppings in one place, which brought me full circle to what I called the bird poo compass many years ago, which is there are more branches on the south side of a tree. You're going to get more birds perching on the branches. You're going to get more bird poo on the south side of a tree than the north side of the tree. So it all... it comes back to your earlier point. I could go on.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
But I like that in your writing that you describe noticing a sign and not necessarily knowing what it means, or noticing a pattern, and then you describe the process of kind of, I keep noticing this thing, and I've worked out what it means. And I quite like that you describe that process, because it means that we all have, as you're saying, you're inviting.
We're going on the journey with you.
Yeah, you're inviting people to share what they've found, and it makes you feel quite empowered that it isn't just you, the expert, talking to us and teaching us stuff. It's that we can notice stuff in our surroundings and unlock clues for ourselves, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I think I would, and not to challenge the idea that it's not necessary, but I've definitely found the more of your books that I've read and the more I've spent time outdoors, and I didn't realise that I had the anxiety before, but that knowing once you said that well, actually you and Gemma both said it this afternoon, that sensation of knowing that you're heading south, or just that feeling that comes over you of like, oh, I can find the direction, quiets a part of my brain, even if I'm not, desperately hungry. It just is a nice little thing that sits in the back of my brain and goes, you're okay, you can take this risk because you know how to find your way out of here, or I don't have to be. Do you know what I mean? There's something.
I do totally, and I think we all have it at the most sort of facetious end of the spectrum. I heard somebody once describe it as Starbucks anxiety, when you're not sure what the nearest franchise coffee outlet. It is in that
common
same
in Devon. That's a big anxiety where we live.
Did you were there any other sort of particular sort of questions, or are there any other sort of areas you'd like to roam into?
I think
do you know what?
rambled and taken a lot of your time.
We could definitely chat all afternoon, but
we are known for rambling.
We won't take up any more of your time. Is there anywhere you'd like to, if anybody's listening who lives under a rock and hasn't heard of you, where's the best place that they can find out who you are and what you're doing and all the things like that?
Oh, that's very kind. I have a website, naturalnavigator.com, and it's hopefully a fun place to explore. And what I've done is allow people to explore the subject through the sort of way in that feels most natural to them. So it might be the stars, it might be the sun, it might be plants, it might be animals, it might be the weather. So you can go in, and there are lots and lots of examples to have a look in there. There's information about the books, and as you kindly sort of mentioned, I do have this newsletter email, which I try to sort of I sort of try and have a bit of fun with a few challenges, and and all the usual online places for the books as well. So thank you very much.
No, thank you so much for talking to you. It's been fascinating. and have a great rest of the day.
Okay.
Cheers. Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for having me. Happy navigating.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
You can visit Children of the Forest in person and get incredible face-to-face training on a range of different topics. Whether you're a full-time forest school teacher, a classroom teacher, or senior management, visit childrenoftheforest.com for details and to book on to all the upcoming training.